Stop taking your protein powder for granted because there is a 50-cent sitting in your refrigerator right now food that a landmark study out of the University of Illinois found stimulates more new muscle protein than a protein shake. Not equal to it, more than it, and almost nobody over 60 has been told this. I'm a physician who has spent the better part of my career studying what happens to the human body after 60, 70, 80 years on this earth. And I want to tell you something that the supplement industry does not want getting out. You do not need a $40 tub of powder to rebuild the muscle you are losing right now today while you sit and watch this video. What you need is sitting in a grocery store bin for about $1. Here is the study that made me sit up straight in my chair. Researchers publishing in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, working with resistance-trained adults, gave one group 18 grams of protein from whole eggs and another group 18 grams of protein from egg whites alone, same protein, same amino acids on paper. The whole egg group showed significantly greater stimulation of muscle protein synthesis after exercise compared to the egg white group, even though the total leucine delivered to the bloodstream was nearly identical between the two. Let that sink in for a second. Same protein amount, same key amino acid, and yet the whole food built more muscle than the purified version. That single finding quietly demolishes the entire premise that protein isolated into a powder is somehow superior to protein still wrapped in its natural food matrix. We're going to come back to that food at the very end because it is the single most powerful, most overlooked $1 muscle builder on this entire list. And by the time I explain the mechanism, you're going to want to go to the store today. But before we get into it, I want to ask you something, and I mean this genuinely. I read every single comment on these videos, every one of them. So tell me down below, how old are you right now, and what is the one physical task, climbing stairs, getting up from the floor, carrying groceries, opening a jar that you wish felt easier than it does today? I ask because I tailor future videos around what you're actually struggling with, not what I assume you're struggling with. So take 30 seconds, scroll down, and tell me. I'll be reading. Now, let's talk about why this matters so much more after 60 than it did at 30. There is a phenomenon in geriatric medicine called anabolic resistance. Think of your muscle cells like a warehouse loading dock. In your 30s, a delivery truck protein from a meal pulls up, the doors open immediately, and the cargo of amino acids gets unloaded and put to work, building new muscle tissue almost instantly. After 60, and especially after 70, that same truck pulls up to the same dock, but now the doors are slower to open. The workers are fewer. A meaningful chunk of that cargo just sits in the truck and gets wasted. Researchers studying this exact phenomenon have shown that older muscle requires a substantially higher dose of amino acids, particularly the amino acid leucine, to trigger the same building response that a smaller dose would trigger in a younger person. This is anabolic resistance, and it is the single biggest reason well-meaning seniors eat enough protein on paper and still lose muscle every single year. Layer on top of that something called inflammaging, a slow, simmering, low-grade inflammation that rises with age even in people who feel perfectly healthy. That inflammation acts like static on the phone line between your brain telling your muscle grow and your muscle actually receiving that signal. And finally, your mitochondria, the tiny energy factories inside every muscle cell, become less efficient with age, producing less usable fuel and more cellular waste product, which further blunts your ability to repair and build tissue after you use it. Sarcopenia, which is the medical term for this age-related muscle loss, now affects somewhere around 10 to 16% of community-dwelling older adults, and the associated healthcare costs have been estimated in the tens of billions of dollars nationally. This is not a cosmetic issue. This is the difference between carrying your own groceries at 85 and needing someone else to do it for you. So today we are counting down 5 foods, ordinary, cheap, unglamorous foods, that research shows fight back against anabolic resistance, inflammaging, and mitochondrial decline more effectively, pound for pound, than most protein powders on the market. We're going from 5 up to the single most powerful item at number 1, the food I mentioned at the start of this video. Let's get into it. Number 5 on our list is canned sardines, and I want you to resist the urge to make a face, because this little fish is doing more for your muscles than almost anything else in the seafood aisle. Picture your muscle tissue as a house under constant low-level renovation, and inflammaging is like a crew of vandals sneaking in every night and quietly damaging the new work before it's finished. Sardines are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA, and a body of research reviewed in outlets, including Harvard Health, has pointed to a 2021 study in which middle-aged and older adults who ate 2 weekly servings of fish saw significant increases in muscle mass, hand grip strength, and gait speed over just 2 months. 2 months. That is a strikingly short window for measurable strength gains from a food most people think of as a garnish. Why does this work specifically in aging bodies? Researchers investigating omega-3 supplementation in older adults have found that these fatty acids don't just fight inflammation from the outside, they appear to improve muscle protein synthesis directly and support mitochondrial efficiency, essentially reducing the static on the line I mentioned earlier, so that the anabolic signal from protein and exercise actually gets through. One physiology study on older adults found that omega-3 fatty acids reduced mitochondrial oxidant emissions while enhancing the muscle's anabolic response to exercise. In plain English, cleaner energy production, and a stronger building response from the same workout. For preparation, buy sardines packed in water or olive oil rather than heavily salted or sauced varieties, and aim for roughly 3 to 4 ounces, 2 to 3 times per week. You can mash them onto whole grain toast with a squeeze of lemon, toss them into a salad, or eat them straight from the tin. I promise the taste is far milder than the reputation. For synergy, pair your sardines with a source of vitamin D, such as a few minutes of midday sunlight or a fortified food, because vitamin D receptors sit directly on muscle tissue and appear to work hand in hand with omega-3s to support the anti-inflammatory, muscle-preserving effect. I think of a patient of mine, Harold, 73 years old, from a small town outside Sacramento. Harold came to me frustrated that his grip strength had declined so much he was dropping his coffee mug. We didn't overhaul his whole diet, we simply added sardines twice a week and a short daily walk. 4 months later, at his follow-up, his grip strength testing had improved enough that he told me, almost sheepishly, that he'd stopped using his spill-proof mug because he didn't need it anymore. Number 4 is cottage cheese. And this one genuinely surprised me when I first read the underlying research, because cottage cheese has this old-fashioned diet food reputation that completely undersells what it's doing biologically. Researchers at Florida State University, led by Dr. Michael Ormsby, ran a study published in the British Journal of Nutrition comparing a whole food serving of cottage cheese against a casein protein shake, both providing 30 grams of protein consumed 30 to 60 minutes before bed. The study found that consuming 30 grams of whole food protein from cottage cheese before bed had a positive effect on muscle quality and metabolism, essentially performing on par with the supplement it was tested against. Separately, other Priestley protein research involving older men found that consuming around 40 grams of slow-digesting casein protein before bedtime increased overnight muscle protein synthesis by roughly 22% compared to a placebo, with that effect sustained across the entire sleep period. Here's why this matters specifically as you age. Overnight is actually a vulnerable window for muscle. You go 7, 8, sometimes 9 hours without any amino acids arriving at that loading dock we talked about, and in a body already dealing with anabolic resistance, that overnight fast can tip the balance toward muscle breakdown rather than repair. Cottage cheese is roughly 80% casein, a slow-digesting protein that releases amino acids gradually over several hours rather than in one quick spike. Think of it less like a delivery truck arriving all at once, and more like a slow, steady conveyor belt feeding your muscles amino acids while you sleep, exactly when your body would otherwise be running on empty. For preparation, aim for a half cup to 1 cup of low-sodium cottage cheese roughly 30 to 60 minutes before bed, which typically delivers somewhere in the range of 15 to 25 grams of protein depending on the brand. If the texture bothers you, blend it smooth with a splash of cinnamon or vanilla. It becomes almost pudding-like. For synergy, pair it with a small amount of healthy fat, like a few walnuts, which slows gastric emptying even further and extends that steady overnight amino acid release even longer. Before we move to number 3, I want to pause here, because if this information is new to you, and I suspect for most of you watching, it is that tells me something important. This kind of research almost never makes it to the people who need it most. So if you do me one favor, hit that subscribe button and tap the like icon on this video right now. It genuinely helps this channel keep researching and translating studies like these, instead of just repeating whatever the supplement companies want, repeated. It costs you nothing and it means everything to this channel continuing. All right, back to the countdown. Number 3 is lentils, and I know a legume sitting at number 3 on a muscle-building list sounds almost like a joke, but stay with me. Researchers studying what's called the gut-muscle axis, including an ongoing multi-year study out of University Hospitals Leuven in Belgium, are investigating how the health of your gut microbiome directly influences systemic inflammation and, downstream, muscle mass and strength in older adults with sarcopenia. Lentils are one of the richest, cheapest sources of fermentable fiber and resistant starch available, and that fiber becomes fuel for the beneficial bacteria in your gut that produce short-chain fatty acids, compounds increasingly linked to lower systemic inflammation. Why does this matter for a body over 60 specifically? Remember that inflammaging static I described earlier, disrupting the signal between eating protein and actually building muscle from it? A gut microbiome in poor health appears to worsen that static, pumping out more inflammatory signals into the bloodstream. Feed the right bacteria with fiber from lentils, and you may be quieting some of that background inflammation, which theoretically clears the pathway for whatever protein you're eating, whether it's eggs, sardines, or cottage cheese, to actually get where it needs to go. Lentils also happen to provide roughly 9 grams of protein and around 15 grams of fiber per cooked cup, so they're doing double duty, feeding your gut and directly contributing amino acids. For preparation, a half cup to 1 cup of cooked lentils daily, added to soups, salads, or as a side dish, is a reasonable target. Canned lentils, rinsed well to reduce sodium, work just as well as dried for this purpose and take a fraction of the prep time. For synergy, pair lentils with a vitamin C source like bell peppers or tomatoes, which meaningfully improves the absorption of the plant-based iron lentils contain, and iron, in turn, supports the oxygen delivery your muscles need to actually perform the resistance activity that triggers growth in the first place. I think about Dolores, 68, from outside Albuquerque, who came to me anemic, exhausted, and convinced her muscle weakness was simply old age, and nothing could be done. We addressed her iron status with a lentil and vitamin C combination at most meals, alongside her existing protein sources, and within about 10 weeks, her energy for her twice-weekly resistance training sessions had transformed enough that she told me she'd gone from dreading the gym to actually looking forward to it. Number 2 is the potato, yes, the humble potato. So maligned by decades of low-carb messaging that most people over 60 have quietly stopped eating it, assuming it's bad for them. I want to correct that assumption directly. A medium potato with the skin on delivers close to 900 milligrams of potassium, more than a medium banana, and potassium plays a role that almost nobody discusses when they talk about muscle. It is essential for the electrical signal that travels from your nerve to your muscle fiber, telling it to contract in the first place. You can have all the amino acids and all the resistance training in the world, but if that electrical signal is weak, because your potassium status is poor, the contraction itself, the actual stimulus for building new muscle, is blunted. Potatoes also contain a compound called resistant starch, particularly when cooked and then cooled, which behaves similarly to the fiber in lentils by feeding beneficial gut bacteria and supporting that same anti-inflammatory gut-muscle axis. And after roughly 75 years of age, many people experience meaningfully reduced kidney efficiency at retaining potassium, alongside lower dietary intake overall, which compounds the risk of a mild but chronically under-recognized potassium deficiency that leaves muscles feeling weaker and more prone to cramping than they should. For preparation, boil or bake your potato with the skin intact, and if possible, let it cool for a few hours or overnight in the refrigerator before reheating gently. This dramatically increases the resistant starch content compared to eating it piping hot straight from the oven. Aim for 1 medium potato most days, prepared this way rather than fried, and go easy on the added salt given how much potassium you're already getting naturally. For synergy, pair your potato with a protein source at the same meal. Eggs, fish, or cottage cheese, because the improved cellular signaling from adequate potassium and the raw building blocks from protein work together far more effectively than either one alone. And now, finally, we arrive at number one, the food I promised you at the very beginning of this video. The $1 food that outperformed isolated protein in the study I opened with, the whole egg. Here is the research again, in full. Scientists comparing whole eggs against egg whites, same 18 grams of protein in each, found that the whole egg produced significantly greater stimulation of muscle protein synthesis after exercise than the egg whites did. And this couldn't be explained away by differences in leucine delivery to the bloodstream, because those were essentially the same between groups. Something else in the whole egg, likely the fat-soluble vitamins, the choline, and the intact nutrient matrix that gets stripped away when you separate out. Just the white was doing additional work that an isolated protein source simply could not replicate. Separate research out of groups studying leucine thresholds in older adults has consistently found that aging muscle needs a higher leucine dose than younger muscle to flip the switch on protein synthesis. And eggs happen to deliver a remarkably efficient, fast-absorbing dose of exactly that amino acid alongside 13 essential vitamins and minerals, all for pennies per egg. Why does this matter so specifically after 60? Because eggs solve two problems simultaneously. First, they overcome anabolic resistance by delivering a concentrated, fast-digesting leucine punch that's large enough to actually trigger the building response in an aging muscle cell, unlike a lot of lower-quality protein sources that simply don't clear that higher threshold. Second, the whole egg yolk included carries choline, which supports the very cellular membranes and mitochondrial function that decline with age, meaning you're not just supplying the raw material for muscle, you're supporting the cellular machinery doing the building. For preparation, I recommend 2 to 3 whole eggs, prepared however you enjoy them, boiled, scrambled, poached, ideally within an hour of resistance exercise if you're doing any strength training, since that's the window when your muscle is most receptive to the signal. If you've been told to avoid the yolk because of cholesterol concerns, I'd encourage you to have a genuine conversation with your own physician about the current research on dietary cholesterol, because for most people, the yolk is where a significant portion of this muscle protective effect actually lives. For synergy, pair your eggs with a vitamin C containing vegetable like spinach or tomatoes cooked alongside them, which supports collagen synthesis in the connective tissue surrounding your muscle fibers. Because strong muscle without strong connective tissue around it is like a powerful engine bolted to a rusted frame. I think of Marjorie, 79 years old, from a small farming community in Ohio, who had genuinely convinced herself that at her age, muscle loss was simply irreversible, a one-way street she'd already been walking down for a decade. We made exactly one change to her breakfast, 2 whole eggs most mornings, alongside her existing modest walking routine. 6 months later, her physical therapist's own assessment showed measurable improvement in her chair rise time. The simple test of standing up from a seated position without using her hands, something Marjorie herself said she hadn't been able to do reliably in years. She cried in my office. Not because the change was dramatic or complicated, but because it was so simple, so cheap, and had been available to her the entire time. All of the studies I've referenced today, the whole egg versus egg white research, the pre-sleep cottage cheese trial out of Florida State, the omega-3 and gut muscle axis findings are linked in the description below, so you can read the original source material yourself rather than simply taking my word for it. I want you informed, not just persuaded. I want to leave you with something that has nothing to do with protein grams or leucine thresholds. Independence, at 70, at 80, at 90, is not an abstract idea. It is the ability to get up off the couch without calling for help. It is carrying your own suitcase through the airport. It is kneeling down to hug a grandchild and being able to stand back up on your own. Every single one of the foods we talked about today is available for around $1, sitting in ordinary grocery stores in every town in this country, and none of them require a prescription, a subscription, or a $40 tub of powder. The muscle you have right now is not fixed. It is not a closed chapter. Whether you are 62 or 91, your body still knows how to build and repair tissue. It simply needs the right raw materials, delivered in the right way, more consistently than most of us were ever taught. It is genuinely, medically never too late to start. If this video gave you something you didn't know walking in, subscribe to this channel because we publish research like this every single week, translating what's actually happening in the scientific literature into food choices you can make today in your own kitchen, on your own budget. And before you go, answer me this in the comments. Of these 5 foods, which one are you adding to your grocery list this week, and which one were you already eating without realizing just how hard it was working for you? I'll see you in the next video.